those of you fighting pipelines and fracking probably know that this week Trump said in Texas, the oil and gas center, that the states can no longer permit pipelines for gas and oil. That affects Keystone. It affects us in New York. We stopped the Constitution, got the governor and the Department of Environmental Conservation not to permit a Constitution pipeline, take frack gas from Pennsylvania to New York. As you know, one of the things, the consequence of us running on a Green New Deal, it narrowed down to the demand to ban fracking. And in 2010, when we ran on it, the environmental groups were saying, oh, gas is the bridge to the renewable future. So, and others were saying, well, maybe not, but we should study it for the water impact. We're saying, no, the climate impact. It's not a bridge, there's a cliff over there. And we're calling for a ban, and the environmental groups said, wow, they're getting a lot of attention for that. The Working Families Party, you probably heard of them. Yeah, well, they were calling for a moratorium in their petition. Day after the election, now it was a ban. And Steyer and those, rich liberals were funding groups to ban fracking. Came back to the 2014 election. Cuomo couldn't resist. So we got a ban on fracking. So what's he doing? He's importing frack gas from Pennsylvania. When we stopped the Constitution pipeline, there's another one called the Williams pipeline. Pennsylvania through New Jersey up into New York City. And the developers and the landlords and the utility companies are saying, oh, if you don't build that pipeline, we won't be able to heat the people in New York. But they compete them right now with the gas pipelines they got. I mean, we're not stupid. This is about expanding it. And if it doesn't go through, Westchester Development stops. National Grid, as we call it, National Grid, you've heard of them. It used to be the public power utility in England, and Thatcher privatized it. Now it's global, and it's we call it in my neighborhood National Grid. It was called National Grid. Anyway, they're telling Westchester that we won't provide gas to new developments. So we got the ban on fracking. So they import frack gas, and they're subsidizing nuclear to the tune of about $8 billion. That goes straight into Exelon. I can see Chicago, maybe trickle down a little bit here, but it doesn't help us. And Governor Cuomo calls that the Green New Deal because it was suddenly popular. So he wasn't talking about no Green New Deal until it made the headlines. Now he's got one. And it's pro-frack gas. And oh, by the way, we'll do a little offshore wind, which we've been talking about for over a decade. So it's getting watered down. And so let me just say a little bit more about what happened so we understand. Now, I think the strength of what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did and the Sunshine Movement, these young folks did, was they put it on the table, and they also kept the link, which we've always talked about, between economic security and climate security. We are not going to get people who can't make rent or that medical bill or pay groceries at the end of the month to be, really saying we got to take risks to change our whole production system, starting with energy, when they're not sure that they can make their own bills. So we've got to provide what we've always talked about in New York. Our Green New Deal was the old New Deal, the fulfillment of the Economic Bill of Rights, plus green energy. That's the green part of the Green New Deal. And I think it's really good that AOC kept that link, and the Sunshine Movement kept that link, even though they watered it down in other ways. But what has happened? The thing in the fall was a select committee for a Green New Deal with the power to subpoena witnesses and put legislation on the floor. And Pelosi said, oh, that's a nice idea, but you can't subpoena people. And then a couple days later, and you can't put legislation on the floor, you got to put it through these other committees. And by the way, I'm appointing fossil fuel politicians, fossil fuel money to run those committees. And then, as things died down a little bit, she said, well, we're not going to do a select committee on Green New Deal. We're going to do a climate committee like I used to have. We know what happened with that, nothing. And put a fossil fuel Democrat in charge of that committee. And so AOC and Senator Markey, who I've known since he was a congressman, in Clamshell Alliance, he was one of the congresspeople, the congressperson. He wasn't always great, but he was a go-to guy for us because he was, basically sympathetic. So they put it a non-binding resolution. And what happened with that? Pelosi won't bring it to the floor. She kind of said, oh, their Green Deep dream or whatever, right? And, then on the Senate side, McConnell said, oh, you can vote on it. And then the Democratic senators are saying, oh, you're doing a trick on us. You know, we want to have hearings, we want to have scientists. And McConnell said, no, you're just getting the vote. So they said, oh, okay, he's tricking us. So we're not going to vote for it, we're going to vote president. And four of them actually voted against it. So this non-binding resolution for a Green New Deal, what happened to it in the Democratic Party? On the House side, Pelosi sliced, diced, and threw it down to disposal. And on the Senate side, the Democrats said president. They didn't vote for it. Because the trick was that they didn't, you know, the real trick was McConnell was going to make them go on record in this primary, and half the senators are running for president. So that's where we're at. That's, if for no other reason why we need a Green Party, we keep putting this forward. So let's talk about what we should be advocating for a Green New Deal. We got to keep that link between economic security and climate safety. And I think we should be talking about an expanded and eco-socialist Green New Deal. Now, by expanded, I mean not just the Economic Bill of Rights plus 100% clean energy by 2030, which is what is technically possible and closer to what the scientists say we need to do. We need to transform all the production systems. If you think about the economy in analogy to an ecosystem, an ecosystem has niches, and there are certain species or clusters of species, and they all relate to each other in something that functions reasonably well. And you can't change one part of it without changing another. Our production systems are the same way. From machines that produce machines, to the machines that produce goods, to the goods moving industry, you know, UPS, I worked for it for a couple of decades. We moved, I know we moved stuff. I can feel it in my bones and my, you know, whatnot. Agriculture, that now, if you think about ecology, we have keynote species, right, that are crucial to an ecosystem. Agriculture is crucial to our economy. I mean, it comes out of nature, the natural capital. And we can't produce food. That's the foundation for civilization. That's the foundation for, you know, us all being alive. And if you see, you know, study ecology and see populations overshoot and crash, I mean, that's where we're headed if agriculture collapses. And it's not just from global warming, although that's a big part of it. Insects are collapsing. You may have seen the reports in recent, in the last couple months. You know, scientists are now saying we're losing 2 or 3% of them a year, and in a couple of decades, they may be gone. That's a, you know, foundation for the whole food pyramid, and particularly agriculture, where they pollinate. And when ecosystems collapse, agriculture collapses, and civilization collapses. This is what people now alive, maybe not someone as old as some of us, but certainly our kids are going to face. This is an existential threat, and the two major parties are just not dealing with it. Of course, Trump is an idiotic fool. I mean, he says it's not happening. He just pandering to these fossil fuel industries. Coal is not competitive economically. He's out there saying we're going to bring back, you know, coal miners. I mean, technology's replaced most of the coal miners. The guy's out of his mind. That's an excuse. Don't give him an excuse. But the Democrats, in practice, are a little better, you know, as we see with this Green New Deal resolution. So when I say an expanded Green New Deal, I'm talking about we need to transform not just the energy production system, but agriculture, transportation, manufacturing, how we design our cities, walkable communities, which has so much to say for, in terms of energy efficiency and materials efficiency, but also for our health and our, you know, both mental, social, and physical. And then military production. We waste so much on the military. And because we focus so much on the military, we've, you know, got behind other countries like Germany and Japan, where their workers in manufacturing get paid a lot more than ours, and their stuff sells better than ours, because ours just isn't that good anymore, because for a lot of reasons we disinvested between military spending and allowing top executives to get so much money that it's better for them to grab that money for themselves instead of put money back into the company. So they're bleeding them dry. And then the financial guys come in and they just, you know, they borrow money, they bleed the country back dry to pay back the money, and then they sell out and, you know, walk away with some money in a company that can't even function. So that's what's been going on with manufacturing. And then the peace conversion. That's something that we have been talking about really since a few years after the Soviet Union collapsed, and we're wondering where's our peace dividend. Of course, we had the first Gulf War, and then we had the Balkan Wars, and then we've been in the Middle East ever since. So we're squandering a lot there and not making friends. So that's what I mean by an expanded Green New Deal. I think the Green Party should set the standard that all the other parties and candidates and electeds have to stand up to. And I'm going to try to lay that out a little bit. And then when I say eco-socialist, look, if we're going to have coordinated reconstruction of all the production systems so we're sustainable and we're not emitting greenhouse gases, it's going to take, the market's just not going to do it because we put a carbon tax out there. It's going to require planning and coordination. And it's going to require taking over some of the industries, like big oil. You think the Koch brothers will take their earnings and put them into renewables because we got a carbon tax? Or Exxon? It's not going to happen. We have to nationalize those industries and make them part of a plan so that we can take the earnings, because we are going to use fossil fuels in the transition. I mean, that gas going in your house or your heating oil, whatever you heat your house with, you know, you're not going to spend next winter without that. And you're probably not going to have your heat or your heating done by an electric heat pump, which I hope everybody knows what that is. It's basically a refrigerator that one way in the summer cools you, and turn it around the other way, it heats you up in the wintertime, and you're basically using the solar energy stored in the ground. I'm trying to get, you guys know what I'm talking about?
Geothermal.
Yeah, well, you call it geothermal, right? It is in a way. There's another geothermal based on, you know, the like geysers and things like that. But okay, good. So that's one of those production systems that we got to do. So okay, yeah, I was talking about, you know, planning those investments. So we've got to do that, and we are got to have utilities that are publicly owned and democratically accountable, so that we can actually plan the transition, because the utility companies resist, and they're all regulated different. In my state, they split generation from distribution. They call it deregulation, and it was supposed to bring down prices. So that's what I'm talking about, eco-socialist and expanded Green New Deal. And so the Economic Bill of Rights, let me just briefly go over that, because I think we're probably all on the same page, but I just want to throw a couple wrinkles in there. You know, we're talking about what's now called a job guarantee. It's what WPA was. I think is the best way to operate it. That's the Work Progress Administration during the New Deal. And what they did was they had local communities plan public works or public services. And those are on a shelf. And then when unemployed people needed work, they go to an employment office, not an unemployment office, and say, I'm ready to work, where's my job? And those people would go to work doing things the communities had already decided they needed. Community put in 10%, the federal government the other 90%. I think that's the model. So these are like backup jobs. The fact is, all the studies on how you transition to 100% clean energy finds labor is the bottleneck. That's the thing that'll slow us down. And that's not just the Jacobson studies lately. It goes back to Ross Geldspan, who was the editor of the Boston Globe, and before that a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter there. And he did some studies. He got some retired oil executives and some Stanford and MIT people, and they said, yeah, labor is what is going to make it take longer than it needs to technologically, because there's so much work to be done. So anyway, we can guarantee everybody good work. We need a basic income guarantee, because not everybody can work. They are too old, too young, sick, disabled, or doing something that's not paid for but needs to be done, like taking care of an elder person in the family or a young child. So there should be a guaranteed minimum income, and there are different ways of doing that. All I care about is whether it's a taxable basic income grant that everybody gets, or it's a negative income tax structured into the tax structure. It should be an income above poverty. Because, I mean, I remember Fred Harris was a senator from Oklahoma. His father was a cotton picker. The guy knew poverty, and through a long story short, he became a U.S. senator, and the oil people that appointed him didn't really know who they were appointing. And he was a populist. And he used to say, you know, the reason poor people are poor is because they don't have enough money. You know, it's so simple. You know, when you ask, you know, middle class people, why are poor people poor? Oh, they're addicted, they're uneducated, you know, maybe they're lazy. You know, it's always the poor are poor because it's their fault. And another person I remember is James Boggs, Grace Lee Boggs, had a pamphlet probably produced around 1970 called Uprooting Racism and Racism. And it starts off by noting that the Kerner Commission on Civil Disorders, you know, the riots we had in the 60s, it said white racism is the problem. And the remedy is education for black folks, you know, job training. You know, that's a problem. Look, put money in people's pockets. Most people are going to be in a lot better shape. You know, there are addicts, there are people that have problems. That's a case for psychiatrists and social workers. Not, you know, this idea that, oh, we just educate these people with some job training and they'll be all right.